So we're all college students here, and we all have to study for tests. We have to study for when our professors give us lectures and stuff. And there's different types of studying. Not studying can't that works for me can't work for Julia. Studying that work or Tiffany studying that works for me can't work for Senya. And so today we're going to teach you the different types of studying techniques that you can use and tips to help you in that process.
So we're going to start with, this shows the 4 different types of learning styles: visual, auditory, reading, writing, preference, and kinesthetic. And we are going to start off with visual learners. According to the Visual Teaching Alliance, visual learners make up roughly 65% of the population as of 1998. Tonight, I will be discussing who visual learners are, characteristics of visual learners, and studying tips for this learning style. So you may be wondering, who are visual learners? Well, they're the ones who have to see information in order to learn it. That includes seeing through spatial awareness, photographic memory, color and tone, brightness and contrast, and other visual information. Additionally, visual learners typically have some characteristics in common with each other. For example, they tend to prefer reading over listening to information. They also study by looking over things, and they require a quiet environment to study. Furthermore, visual learners usually prefer to work by themselves instead of in groups. They also remember things better if they write them down, like I did, because I'm not going to remember if I don't write it down, because I'm definitely a visual learner. And last but not least, they have decent attention to detail as well. Finally, there are several studying techniques that can be helpful to visual learners. The first is color coding. If you use different colored pens or highlighters when you take your notes and go back over, and if you're reading in the textbook and you highlight things that are important for like vocab or other things. If you read visuals like diagrams and charts in your textbooks, make to-do lists, study by yourself, take notes during class, and sit in front of the classroom if you can get as close to the front as possible. It's less distractions. And writing outlines and using flashcards, and if you can, watch documentaries or videos. Now you know who visual learners are, what their characteristics are, and several studying techniques that can be used for this learning style. Although most of the population consists of visual learners, there are other types of learners too. If visual learning doesn't fit for you, perhaps the auditory learning style that Julia will explain next will be a better fit.
Thank you. So bear with me. I'm losing my voice. So auditory learners. Auditory learners are people who would comprehend information through listening. They also make up about 30% of the population, which, when you think about it, when you think about your primary and secondary education, they teach you mainly through auditory learning techniques, which is strange when most of the population, like Tiffany said, are visual learners. But that's just our public education system. We really can't put too much stock into that. Characteristics of auditory learners. Someone who reads aloud. They're not crazy, they're just an auditory learner. Someone who can't concentrate in noisy environments, which are similar to what Tiffany said about visual learners. Someone who prefers lectures and discussions. Someone who's proficient in oral reports. Someone who prefers spoken directions over written directions. Someone who has difficulty understanding visual aids such as graphs or charts. And someone who enjoys music and podcasts. Now, tips for auditory learners. Some of these will be similar to what Tiffany stated, along with what Sierra and Senya. I always mess up her name.
I know, everybody does.
So if you're an auditory learner, you're going to want to record lectures or listen to lectures that are pre-recorded via YouTube or offered on campus web. Again, you're going to want to read the material out loud. This allows you to really process the information and understand what you're reading. Also, talk through the problem, especially if you're in groups or if you're just with a friend. Talking through the problem, especially with new processes, the big things are to figure out what you're trying to understand, why you're trying to understand it, and how it's supposed to be. Again, discuss it with classmates. This has really helped me because I am mainly an auditory learner. And because you will have difficulties understanding visual aids, talk through them, understand what this graph is showing you or why it's important. Auditory learners, when they hear something, they can soak it up like a sponge, and on average they'll soak up about 70% of what they hear. So really utilize that, sit up close in class, ask questions, talk with your classmates if you still don't understand. And next we have reading and listening with Sierra.
So, how do you know if your studying technique is reading or writing? Do you prefer to use printed word for most of the time, and is that the way you convey or receive information? If that is you, then most likely your study technique is reading or writing and works best for you. My name is Sierra Jones, and I'm going to talk to you about reading and writing for studying techniques, because that's my studying technique. So, who are reading and writing learners? Reading and writing learners fit into the conventional schools type of system when a teacher is speaking and then you write down the notes and then you come home and then you read those notes and then you rewrite them to, like me, to make them pretty again or something. Let me go back. According to the study guru, read and write learners are considered to make good traditional studiers. They fit in the conventional school-taught study method of reading textbooks and writing notes. Reading and writing learners are good at taking notes during class, and they study best by reading over these notes and copying them out, and they grasp that information by utilizing the note-taking strategies and transcribing the concepts into ideas. So, what are the characteristics of these reading and writing learners? They enjoy reading, kind of. I wouldn't say I necessarily enjoy reading, I'm just pretty good at it. Who would rather read by themselves than be read to? Sometimes seeing that plays kind of into the visual, but most of the time when you do, your study technique isn't just one, it's multiple combined. You often take verbal notes, or so when they're speaking and then you're writing down what they're saying. And then you work best in quiet areas when it's a loud environment or when a lot of people are speaking. It's not ideal for that type of person to be able to comprehend or receive all of that information. And then you like to articulate teachers who put a lot of information into sentences and notes, so then you can read that again, and then if you need to write that again as well. You won't hesitate to find a definition in the dictionary, which is also good when your teacher says something and you're wondering, what does that say, or what does that word mean, and then you go home and you read that definition and then you write out what that means, and that's a great way of comprehending that as well. So tips for these kind of learners would be as follows. Take notes during class. To take notes effectively, paraphrase what the professor said and what is written on the lecture slides. You don't need to write down everything. In fact, it's better to take the information down in your own words. It helps to ingrain what you've learned when you attach a physical motion, especially if the notes were originally typed. It's best to rewrite the notes out in your own handwriting, and as you're rewriting them, you're comprehending them again. And then reading and writing learners who are more towards the reading side dedicate some time to finding supplementary information on what you're learning about. So your teacher speaks, and then you go home and they're speaking about biology. So then you go home and you read some type of thing about biology just to get more supplementary information about that, and read that and process that and that concept. And then make a list. Bullet notes are always great. You're still writing that out, but it's reading and writing that process. And then turn diagrams into words. The picture into words can really play the difference in what you grasp and what you grasp in the concept. And that is reading and writing.
If you look around the room right now, everybody is sitting, they're being quiet, and they're not moving much, and they're listening to us. But some of you guys are finding it harder than the others. And if you're right now one of those people who are moving their legs just like this, touching their ears, their hair, this might indicate that you're a kinesthetic type of learner. Because kinesthetic type of learners, they need to move to process the information. They find the best information to be processed when they're moving and when they're physically engaged during the process of learning. In other words, they understand things by doing them. And some of the other indicators, apart from you find it hard to sit still in the class, are you struggle to understand information presented in a lecture form. You will go to class, you will listen to a lecture, but then you will go back home and you would have to find some other way to process that information because you didn't get anything. Next thing is you enjoy hands-on activities. This can be art, craft, this can be sports. As long as you like doing something with your hands, you like moving, that means most likely kinesthetic type of learning fits you the best. And if you're better at remembering things that you have done before, you have a good motor memory. If something that you've done before, you forget it kind of hardly, that means you're probably a good athlete, but also you're a kinesthetic type of learner. So these are some characteristics of kinesthetic learners. I also found them to be strengths of kinesthetic learners. And one of them is great eye-hand coordination. And as you will see, a lot of these characteristics of strengths are also characteristics of good athletes. But just because you're a good athlete doesn't mean you're a kinesthetic type of learner. And if you're a kinesthetic type of learner, doesn't mean you're a good athlete. So, if you have quick reactions, you have excellent motor memory, and you can duplicate something after doing it once, you're a kinesthetic type of learner. You're good at experiments. I don't know about American physics and chemistry classes, but I remember back home I would hate all of those classes where they would drag us into the class and we would have to sit down and listen for 2 hours of just theory about chemistry. But then that one lab day, when we would actually get to see everything and touch it and experiment, I would love it. So we are excellent experimenters, usually good at sport, perform well in art or drama, and have high levels of energy. This means that kinesthetic type of learners usually are hardly recognized. It's believed that they are present in a smaller percent of population, but also kinesthetic type of learners are often diagnosed with ADHD. So if you have a kid who can't sit still, they're moving their legs all the time, can't sit still in a restaurant, at home, at school, just get into sports, drama, art, anything, because it doesn't mean that they are sick or that they have some kind of problem. Maybe they just need different type of learning. And here are some studying tips for kinesthetic learners. First one is use your hands while studying. You might seem like a crazy person in a lab, in a library, while you're explaining with your hands. Everybody's looking at you. Maybe you're not making any sound. It doesn't mean that you're an auditory learner. Maybe you are talking to yourself at the same time, but use the hands because the whole library is your stage. Next thing that will help you is combine studying with locking movement. So you don't have to do push-ups while learning because it probably won't help you much, but having a tennis ball, punching it to the wall, just throwing it in the air, it might help you actually memorize if you're this type of learner. The next one is study in groups. So as Julia mentioned and Sierra mentioned, and reading and writing type of learner, and vision. Well, I didn't mean auditory, but and people who learn by looking at this stuff, they usually need quiet place to learn, and they usually don't like studying in groups. But we do. You want to talk to people, you want to discuss stuff, and most importantly, if you find somebody that you can teach, it's even better. Teach others. If you don't have a roommate, I used to do it to my little brother. He knew so many information about, once again, physics and chemistry, because he would just listen to me throughout my whole middle school, just spilling that information to him because I needed somebody to teach to. He didn't care about it. He was just poor guy. He couldn't escape it. But find something. It can be stuffed animal. Teach somebody, because as you teach somebody, you will memorize it better, and you will have the feeling that you need to acquire more and more information. So teaching others is always a good way to study if you're a kinesthetic type of learner. And make mnemonic devices. I didn't know about this one because I never needed to learn this, but apparently the most famous one is, "Please excuse my dear Auntie Sally," which stands for parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. You can make it for anything that you're studying. If you need to remember a lot of words right after each other, try to make a mnemonic device. It might help you. There is example of one of them over here, PEN, for protons, electrons, and neutrons. There is